If you talk about these things in a workplace, that's sexual harassment. But when you do it in an education and you talk to kids, suddenly it's acceptable. Look, asking a minor to disclose their sexual orientation and gender identity has nothing to do with any community. It's nobody's business. That's the truth. It's nobody's business. And I see the school board constantly justifying this. And the board, they need to stop hiding behind marginalized students and families and take accountability for their poor behavior. And this is what I'm really seeing that they're lacking. As a matter of fact, they have policies that stop the communication with parents.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News, about to bring you the delegation and concerns of a Canadian father around the topic of gender identity and sexual orientation plaguing minors through the education system in Ontario. It's part of why we've launched a petition and email blast campaign at stopclassroomgrooming.com, because who in their right mind is interested in the sexual orientation and gender identity of minors? It's perverted, and it needs immediate investigation by Education Minister Stephen Lecce. So head on over to our website at stopclassroomgrooming.com to learn more and see how you can get involved. Because as it turns out, Ontario dad David Todor has undertaken advocacy work within the Waterloo District School Board, where his children attend elementary school, to shed light on the extreme sexually explicit content made readily available to elementary school children, i.e. minors, through school library portals, either in person or online. His recent delegation went viral and even hit international news outlets.
This morning, I accessed a book. I can assure you that this book has been approved and is accessible to my daughter, the one that's 7 years old. By the way, I have accessed this book. I'm going to read you a little passage from this book, because if it's good enough for her to access it, it's good enough to be read over here. And this book is approved according to the Waterloo District School Board for grade 4 to 5 reading level. He could have been an active homosexual, but lacked the courage. Bestiality did not occur to him, and sodomy was quite out of the question, for he did not experience sustained and could not endure the thought of somebody else's. And since he was too different to confront homosexuality, and since little boys were insulting, scary, and stubborn, he further limited his interest to little girls. They were usually manageable and frequently seductive. But someday I will die. I was always so kind. Why do I have to die? The little girls are the only things I'll miss. Do you know that when I touched their and bit them just a little?
And David joins me now to discuss what prompted this advocacy work, what he found in some of the most vile examples of sexually explicit material available to minors at school, and what he is doing to push back. Check it out.
So last year, on January 17th, there was a teacher that was talking about the school books at our board meeting. And she brought up two books, and I didn't know anything about it. All I've seen was that the school board took down the video, and I thought this was pretty suspicious. I ended up seeing the video, and I heard the content that was in these books, and I just had to see for myself. I just couldn't believe that these books were approved and in the school. So I started going down a rabbit hole, exploring the books and the materials and the policies that the school board has in place, and I couldn't believe it. So the teacher's name was Carolyn Berjowski, and her delegation had an impact on me, and this is how I got started.
Now, the rabbit hole that you ended up going down, tell me about the disconnect that there appears to be between books that are approved and in the library for very young school-age children, minors, versus the policy and protocol that's supposed to be in place for approving this kind of content to be, again, accessible easily to minors?
Well, the books are pretty much accessible, especially if there's an ebook. It's accessible to anybody. So I've had a delegation myself, and I've talked about a book called The Bluest Eye. And this book had themes of pedophilia and incest. And this book is an ebook, and I was able to access this book on my 7-year-old daughter's account online. So anybody can access this book anywhere. You just log in. So I'm really struggling to see what the criteria is and how during the approval process, these books are bringing substantial academic value. And the books that Carolyn was talking about, one of the books was called The Other Boy. And this book follows the story about a girl that undergoes medical treatment to transition into a boy. So I just want to read a little passage from The Other Boy. And I'm going to let you know my thoughts on this. So here's a quick quote. "But if he stops taking the shots, that's reversible too, right?" "Not entirely," Dr. Ann said. "Some of the changes will be permanent. Others could be reversed surgically, or they'll just go away. But Shane will have skipped female puberty, which means he most likely won't be able to have children naturally." So I found this rather concerning because the book also kind of trivializes these medical procedures. These medical procedures are pretty involved. I mean, we're talking about sterilizing children from a young age, whether it's chemical or physical sterilization. And it just kind of trivializes the topic, like it's not a big deal, it's pretty cool. And on April 13th, 2022, the Waterloo District School Board director made an announcement on Instagram, and he had the two books that Carolyn got canceled, which was Rick and the Other Boy, sitting right beside him. And this gives me the impression that these books and the content in these books are being promoted. And this book, both of these books actually, are available in kindergarten to grade 6. So these are the kind of topics that kids are being made available. And these issues are serious issues. Like I said, permanent life changes, mental and physical ramifications. So I want to show you this other book. Like I said, there are a ton of books in the library. This book is called "This Book is Gay." So in this book, there's a diagram, part 1, boy on boy sex. Here's a diagram of a boy. If you are also a boy, you are probably aware which parts feel nice when you touch them. But here's a rough guide. And then the book also says, and notice the terminology, how they make things sound a little childish. Okay, handies. Perhaps the most important skill you will master as a gay or bi man is the timeless classic, the hand job. Learning how to find a partner's personal style can take ages, but it can be very rewarding when you do. Blowies. Oral sex is popping another dude's peen in your mouth, or indeed popping yours in his. Bumming. It is the universal truth that many men like sticking their willies inside things. I suspect it must be biological. Well, in the absence of a vagina, gay and bi men make excellent use of the back door. When I see these kind of books, I really question the direction that the school board is heading, especially when they make this kind of material available to children.
Right. And if you had seen someone on the street and they would be sharing this kind of information with a minor or soliciting the sexual orientation and gender identity of a minor, typically those people would be labeled as perverted pedophiles. And in the olden days, they would be jailed. So what makes it acceptable here for a school board and an individual school to be conducting this type of behavior versus a person on the street who we would condemn widely?
Exactly. And to add on to that, if you talk about these things in a workplace, that's sexual harassment. But when you do it in an education and you talk to kids, suddenly it's acceptable. Look, asking a minor to disclose their sexual orientation and gender identity has nothing to do with any community. It's nobody's business. That's the truth. It's nobody's business. And I see the school board constantly justifying this. And the board, they need to stop hiding behind marginalized students and families and take accountability for their poor behavior. And this is what I'm really seeing that they're lacking. As a matter of fact, they have policies that stop the communication with parents. You know, the director of the Waterloo District School Board recently said that in the LGBTQ community, there are students who are at high risk of depression and suicide. And if this is the case, I'm wondering why he has policies that keep the communication with parents closed, especially when kids are at high risk of depression and suicide. You would think these are very serious issues and that the parents ought to know what is happening. Yet the board continues to wedge a divide between parents, and they do not release information. They trivialize what is going on, and it's putting these kids in a difficult situation. Secrecy, sexual questions, and inappropriate materials are putting kids in a situation the school seems to justify under protecting human rights. And I believe this situation is child abuse. Like I said, this has nothing to do with marginalized groups of kids, and they should not be asked to disclose their sexuality and gender identity to strangers.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, what does this even have to do with delivering educational services to these children? And a part of one of your delegations that really stood out to me is you asked, who is interested in the sexual orientation of my child? And can anyone answer that basic question? Who's responsible and who does this really interest here to get gender identity and the sexual orientation of minors?
Well, let me tell you, I have not received an answer from the school board. The only answer the school board gave was an open letter that was anonymous. So I don't even know who wrote the letter. And in this letter, they reference a bunch of the documents that I actually criticized. So I am very happy that they put them there because I encourage people to go and read the documents. The other thing that the school board did not disclose was the surveys themselves. There is a huge disconnect between what the school says is on the survey and what the school has on the survey. The school last year did was called a strategic planning survey, where they were trying to gather information so they could have a strategic plan going forward. And on this survey, they approved it for kids grade 4 and up. The survey itself actually had a category that you can identify yourself age 4 to 13. So I'm wondering why the school has the survey ages 4 to 13. And I'm wondering how many kids between that age actually filled out the survey.
Well, and it begs the question as well, how many of these children, if they're filling it out without parental oversight and guidance, which is something that I've discovered was ministry directive. I mean, regardless, I think this is grotesquely inappropriate and should not be in the school system at all. But it looks like individual school boards are disregarding ministry directive. And so if these very young, immature minors are not having these surveys conducted with parental oversight, then what's the point? I mean, as a young child, would you even take something like this seriously, or would you just goof off and answer willy-nilly, whatever the flavor of the day is? The whole thing just seems so messy and discombobulated and intentionally confusing, both for students and parents. But what's the next step here? Where do you go from here as you continue on this path of advocacy and, I guess, bringing support awareness to this gross overreach?
That's a great question. And also, I'm wondering why students who have no sexual experiences, I know my daughters have no sexual experiences, how are they expected to know what they prefer in their sexual life? And if a student does know, that would raise alarms of child abuse. And because this kind of talk is so normalized, it's very hard to distinguish between actual child abuse victims and just your regular school talk. I take this stuff very seriously, and there's actually a lot of steps parents can take. I've started my own podcast on YouTube called Beyond the Rift, where you can see my full delegation, information on my delegation. You can see Carolyn's delegation. I go through the documents, through the policies, so you can see with your own eyes what the school board is up to. I would start perhaps by emailing the principal and asking them, are the kids in my school made or encouraged to disclose their sexuality or gender identity to any staff? Are any staff disclosing their sexuality or gender identity to the students? Are there any third parties, educators, individual organizations coming into the school presenting on this and encouraging students to disclose their sexuality or gender identity to each other or to staff? Are there any materials being handed out at school encouraging students to disclose their sexuality or gender identity?
Yeah, well, thank you for your continued work on this file, David, and please do keep me posted and in the loop as things develop.
Absolutely, Tamara. I really appreciate this opportunity.
If you're shocked and disgusted at what David has detailed, then head on over to stopclassroomgrooming.com, sign our petition, send an email to Minister Lecce expressing your disgust in this perversion, and sign up to stay up to date on all of our reports. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Education Minister Stephen Lecce needs to take immediate action to end this perversion and sexualization of children in schools. Head on over to stopclassroomgrooming.com to let him know that you want this ideology out of schools and away from children. That's stopclassroomgrooming.com.